Okay, we are live.
What just happened here?
We are live. Did we lose you, Eric?
Something happened.
Yeah, we went live.
Hold on, there you are.
All right. Something was just weird on you. All right, guys. Sorry for that weird start. This is Inner Space discussion. We are going through chapter 9. I got the chapter right this time. And it is Malkut. It's a short chapter. But Malkut is the purpose of all this, right? It's what we're driving for. It's the whole idea behind the Sephiroth and everything is to get down to Malkut, which is where we are at, so that we can be not only receivers but engage in giving as well. So we'll get into that in a moment. But I just want to give another disclaimer again. We are not, at least most of us, Elishiva might not, I'm not going to necessarily include her in this mix, but most of us are learners here as well, and we're just providing a forum for people to kind of tag along with us as we challenge ourselves to grasp a lot of these concepts. So, some of the stuff we'll have a better grasp of, other things that we'll just be kind of fighting through and just kind of bouncing ideas off of. So don't take anything that we say in these conversations as being set fast in stone, but rather use them as a tool to kind of launch your own investigation into the matter. So with that being said, I'm going to start off with Malkut, and I'm just going to read a little bit of this chapter, and anybody that has any things that they want to kind of chime in on, feel free to interrupt me at any point in time and chime in. So I don't want to just, if you have an idea, go for it. Page 74. In order to avoid any confusion between the first triad, Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet, and the second triad, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, let me give two examples illustrating the relationship they have with each other. In the case of a city wanting to control traffic flow across a bridge, Chesed would let as much traffic through as wants to cross. Gevurah would close it off completely. Tiferet would try to reach some kind of optimum. We now have established that we want to find the optimum, but in terms of whom? An optimum for the city or for the people who want to enter? There are two possible optimums. Another example would be to look at the relationship in terms of the desire to give. Chesed would be giving without regard to the consequences. Gevurah is holding back tightly, not giving anything. Tiferet is trying to reach the optimum of how much to give, but again, how is the optimum decided? Should it be according to the giver's needs or the receiver's? Netzach is giving the optimum according to the giver's needs. Hod is giving it according to the receiver's. Yesod is giving it according to the needs of both. In the traffic analogy, Netzach would involve controlling traffic according to the city's needs. Hod would be controlling it according to the individual needs of every driver. Yesod would again be the optimum of considering the needs of both. We can see then that Tiferet is trying to reach an optimum, Yesod is reaching it, and Netzach Hod are different sides of that optimum. The six Sephiroth from Chesed love to Yesod thus constitute a single unified structure. We have seen that these six Sephiroth are the Vav of the Tetragrammaton. The Vav is the idea of forming a connection, of giving. In essence, the first triad represents the initial reaching out to give. This giving, however, is still too powerful to be received. It is only in the second triad that the concept of giving is brought to its perfection, and tailored, so to speak, to the needs of the receiver. Altogether, then, we have these six elements in the idea of giving. I'm going to pause there. I really like that analogy, and that does help me a lot because in kind of seeing a little bit more of the differentiation between Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, and then the upper three triad, which is Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. So that, yeah, we're at your Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. They're almost like more fundamental aspects of giving and receiving. Whereas you get down to Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, we're now getting more into particulars. There's a lot more nuance involved. There's a lot more pieces, so to speak, in the works that are being dealt with, and that that Yesod. So they kind of mirror the one above it, but they're more filtered down, if you will, to a lower level, where there's a lot more particulars, so to speak, going on. Yeah. Anyone have any other comments on that analogy? Any thoughts? I like how well, it's helpful also to kind of remind myself that all 6 of these are, a single part suf. We'll get to part sufs later, but they're a single section. They represent or correspond to the yod, or the vav, and the tetragrammatron, which is the aspect of the process of giving, or reaching out and giving, so to speak. So they're all involved in that process, and there's the higher level of giving, or the higher level of that process of giving, and then there's the lower level, or the more rubber meets the road probably level. More practical level of giving, which that would be the Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. So anyway, moving on. It says, when we now bring in the last hay of the tetragrammaton, corresponding to Malkut kingship, we have the idea of receiving. It is the idea of being a kali, a vessel. Malkut is the power that God gives us to receive from him. Furthermore, it is in Malkut that the purpose of giving is realized, a relationship where the one who receives can reciprocate and become a giver. It is for this reason that Malkut is seen as a feminine sephirah. On the one hand, it is the ultimate vessel that was created to hold God's light. It represents the epitome of receiving and is therefore characterized as the sephirah that has nothing of its own. Malkut must literally receive everything that it has from the sephirot that precede it. On the other hand, Malkut represents the power that ultimately unifies all of the diverse powers of the Sephirot and holds everything together. Without Malkut, creation would remain incomplete. When we examine the difference between giving and receiving in terms of masculinity and femininity, we can see that the paradigm of a man is more diversified, whereas the paradigm of a woman is more unified. This becomes evident in the Sefer Yetzirah, which states, as mentioned, that the 6 days of the week, which are masculine, are the 6 directions pointing outward. The Sabbath, on the other hand, which is feminine, is the center point that draws all 6 points together. Essentially, this teaches us that when we look at ourselves in terms of our external relationships, we are looking at our masculine identity. When we look at ourselves, our inner core, we are almost looking at a feminine entity. I want to stop there real quick. He's connecting here the 6 sephirot of that correspond to the vav, and he's corresponding, which is Hesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, to the 6 work days of the work week. And then he's connecting Malkut, which is this one at the bottom, which everything filters down into, to Shabbat. And so we've got those giving and receiving, those six days of giving and receiving, those 6 days of work, right? And then we got this feminine aspect of Shabbat, which is receiving. And then you'll hear Shabbat referred to as very connecting with the feminine. There's the as far as like women are concerned, like the woman of the household is the Shabbat queen, is connects to that. The Shekhinah connects to Shabbat, which is a feminine aspect of Hashem. And then this section just reminded me a little bit, and it's a passage in the New Testament that still throws me off, if you will. It's Hebrews 3 and 4. You hear the writer talking about the people in the wilderness not entering into the Sabbath rest. But then he says that you diligently seek to enter into that Sabbath rest, and there's a lot of goofy interpretations that are built off of that. But I feel like this section, I don't have it quite figured out yet, but I feel like this section is providing a little bit of a structure or framework to be able to comprehend what that writer's trying to relate, perhaps on a better level, so to speak. How the 6 work days, or the 6 days of the work week, we're working towards something, right? And then that Shabbat, that place where we receive, we're taking that feminine aspect. We're not doing anything We're just receiving. We're receiving, but we've put all this aspect, this work in. We've been in our masculine side of things, if you will, and then we step into this feminine side where we just receive. And that's really kind of the point of everything, right? We're if we think eschatologically or just within the 6 millennia or the 7 millenniums that we've got going on in this cycle right now, we're working towards this millennial time where we're going to receive anyway, right? And Shabbat is an allusion to that. So I don't know if that I made things any clearer with there, but it's just stuff that stood out to me when I was reading through that. Any thoughts from anyone else before I read on?
Thank you. It's all good.
Okay. So last paragraph on page 75. If you think of male and female biologically, the male is the giver. The female receives and nurtures and then gives forth much more than the man initiated. The man gives over 1 million sperm cells, from which the woman selects only one. From her one single fertilized egg, however, she gives back a complete infant. She receives, but as part of receiving, she ends up creating and building something complete. Hence the essence of femininity turns more complex. If masculinity is giving, femininity is receiving and completing. Whereas masculinity parallels Yetzirah, which is something from something, and Yetzirah is on the level of the Olamot, or the universes. It's the one right above where we're at, which is Asiyah, right? And that's something from something. Something means it's coming from the level of Beriyah, which is the first created, if you will, part of creation, so to speak. And Beriyah came from nothing, which is above that. So Beriyah is considered Yesh Mi'ayin, or something from nothing. But then Yetzirah, which is the level below Beriyah, is the first level that came from something. So that's why it says it's something from something. Just kind of a backtracking right there. So parallels Yetzirah, which is something from something. The femininity of Malkut parallels Asiyah, which is the level that we're at, or the Olamot that we're at, which is completion. I want to pause right there real quick, just to reiterate that feminine and masculine, you'll hear these terms a lot from the Kabbalists.
We lost you. We lost you, Seth, for about 30 seconds there.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Where did I stop at?
About 30, 40 seconds ago. Now you're off again.
Oh.
Did everyone else lose me?
No, I
heard you.
Yeah, I heard you too.
Okay.
Oh,
so
you were hearing him? I wasn't hearing him at all.
Oh.
Okay, maybe there was something on the download then.
Must be on my end then, because your screen totally cut out and I didn't hear you. So that's okay. Go ahead.
Eric, I'm just going through this paragraph that starts on 75 and ends on 76, and I'm just kind of using it to reiterate the concepts of masculinity and femininity in Kabbalah. It's not, don't think of it so much as in gender per se, biological, but if something's masculine according to the Kabbalists, it's a giving force. It's bestowing something, it's giving something, and if something's feminine in the Kabbalistic mindset, it's something, it's receiving, it's on the receiving end, right? So it's relative, so to speak, right? You can get up to Kokma and Bina. We're going to get into this in the next section. But Kokma, which is up here at the top, is a masculine force in relation to Bina, which is a receiving force. Bina is referred to as the womb and connected to the feminine aspect a lot. But then everything below Bina, right?
Yes, but Hokmah in relation to Keter is feminine.
Exactly. So as far as the masculine and feminine side of things, we're not we're really dealing with relative terms. And Malkut is the ultimate feminine, so to speak. But it connects to David Hamelech, right? Who is if we look at the guy in the Bible, he really represents. He seems pretty masculine, right? He went out and got 200 foreskins, from the Philistines. It's not a dainty guy, right? But he still represents this aspect of Malkut, which is a severely feminine aspect. We can get into that more later, but it's a relative concept, I guess, is the best way to put it. So you'll hear things sometimes in masculinity and femininity in the Kabbalah that may seem, and the reason why I kind of digress a little bit is it may seem almost offensive to women at times, and it's not. Like you'll hear, you know, feminine aspect being connected with evil, and don't think of it as saying women are evil, because it's not saying that at all. It's just it's in the respect of a giving and a receiving force, or that end, so to speak, in that term.
Well,
So
a really important concept that really helped me, because many years ago, especially when you go through the Siddur, you see that prayer thing. Oh, thank God for making me a man, and you know,
yeah,
it's hard to swallow that a lot of these aspects are described in the feminine form and wording, and yeah, it's interesting that if you get to this higher realm, that you see that this I hate to use the word evil. It's a holy concept. It's as holy as this force of good, and they're equal partners in bringing about creation and reality.
right.
And the only part that it's interesting that he uses this in my studying Sefer Yetzirah for the other class is Arya Kaplan uses the 6 points being bound together in one, these 6 directional points. He uses give the analogy why it's come it exists, and so this is this physical force that draws everything together, and he brings it to this idea that is the force that is the corruptible force, because it's receiving the corruption from creation. It's the receptacle for all of the good and the bad. And that's why in this fallen state that we have right now, that evil is equated, you know, evil, the feminine aspect is equated with this idea of bad or corrupt force.
Right. Well, it's also worth mentioning that you know, the sages say that the repentant one, or the one who's made teshuva, the Baal teshuva, stands at a higher level than the Sadiq, so to speak, or a level that the Sadiq can attain. So you know, this whole concept of evilness, if you will, is we really have to kind of separate our Western mentality of what evil is, or how we relate to evil, as just being, you know. This black and white bad thing, and it's just it's something that's apart from Hashem, right? Something that's the antithesis of Hashem, so to speak. We you know in our simple mind we like to think of like, well God's light, and then evil is darkness, and somehow darkness is in opposition to him, but it's not. The darkness is actually serving the light, and without the darkness, you know, those who have descended, if you will, into the darkness, so to speak, when they return, there's a very lofty level that can be attained, and it's still something that I kind of am fascinated by, and looking in, especially in Hasidut, they get really kind of into that concept a lot. So, but you don't need to go there. Needless to say, you know, femininity and masculinity are both very good things in all of this, even when it sounds like one's being taught negatively. So this next paragraph is one. These next 2 paragraphs, actually, and I'll read through them and I'll stop. Kind of throw me off for a loop, because they do mess with my little framework on masculinity and femininity, so to speak, as far as these go. So maybe we can hash this out. So I'm setting this out there for the other people that are in the group to maybe you can help me piece these together a little better. So I'm just going to read it real quick. It says, in speaking about Chokhmah and Bina, we mentioned the verse, God founded the earth with wisdom, Chokhmah, and established the heavens with understanding, Bina. The Kabbalists point out that the feminine principle, earth, has its root in Chokhmah, whereas the masculine principle, heaven, derives from Bina. This follows from what we have said. Bina is Bain, separateness. It is therefore directly associated with the diversified nature of the 6 masculine Sephirot. Chokhmah, on the other hand, represents the totally integrated unity that typifies the essence of women. This relationship is illustrated beautifully in the Hebrew language itself. The Hebrew masculine personal pronoun is distinguished from the feminine personal pronoun by a single letter. The Hebrew who means he, while the Hebrew he means she. In the case of who, the central letter is the vav, which represents the 6 masculine sephirot. The feminine pronoun he contains a yod. The yod is a single point, the unified power of Chokhmah, that predominates in the essence of a woman. In addition, the numerical value of Yod is 10, alluding to the fact that the 10 Sephirot are undifferentiated in Chokhmah, separated and diversified from Bina to Yesod, and finally brought together again as a single unit in Malkut. This alludes to the fact that the entire array of the 10 Sephirot reaches its culmination in Malkut. All right, I'm going to stop there. My problem with the paragraph that prior to this one is got Chokhmah, right, which is a masculine force, and Bina, which is a feminine force, and Chokhmah filters into Bina, and Bina being the womb, right, is where the axioms, if you will, gestate, and then they filter into Da'at, right, and they give you knowledge or things that you can actually work with, and things that you're actually doing stuff with, right? But here we have the Kabbalist pointing out that the feminine principle, Earth, has its root, which is the feminine principle, right, has its root in Chokhmah, which I associate with being masculine, right? It has its root, and maybe I can understand this as its root is it's coming out of Chokhmah. But then I get thrown off, whereas in the next section it says, whereas the masculine principle, heaven, derives from Bina, right? So it's like it's going backwards. Unless heaven is below Bina somehow, below the earth. This follows from what we have said. Bina is being separateness, is therefore directly associated with the diversified nature of the 6 masculine Sephirot. Chokhmah, on the other hand, represents the totally integrated unity that signifies the essence of women. I'm going to stop there because I'm continuing to confuse myself. Anyone else have any insight into this that can help me out here?
Yeah, Seth, I don't know if it's going to help you solve your problem, but you can see the same thing if you go and when we continue reading and we get to the section on Partsufim, in a similar fashion, you have Zeron Pin being connected with Ima, which Zeron Pin is the 6 masculine Sephirot, and Ima is Bina. And then you have Nukva, or Malkut, being connected to Abba, or Chokmah. So you have the exact same thing happening there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if going and reading that again would help you understand it anymore.
But you know that I had a difficult time with the Partsufim, bro. So I don't know.
Well, for my purposes, and when I envision this, of course, I have to envision everything and then understand that it doesn't fit my vision. But first, I have to envision it. So for me, it serves my purposes for the purpose of seeing this principle at work, to stop looking at the Sephirot as right-left relationships, and just see the Sephirot, the 10 Sephirot, in a lateral relationship with one another. Okay, and so having said that, the whole thing stems back right to the complete oneness and unity of Hashem. Okay, and so in the same way that we see in Bereshit, created God. We understand that aspect on which the beginning created this aspect that we would relate to as gods. There was enough of a restriction that went on there that would ultimately result in some conceptual and principle type of forces that would work together to allow us to have some sort of conceptualization of something that cannot possibly be conceived. Okay, and so our view of God that we call masculine, from that perception, is not masculine at all, it's feminine. Okay, and so it has received its existence from something in order for us to be able to benefit from it. And so, in the same way, that that would be, in a sense, the foundational principle of all created things. It would, from that, everything else would receive, and so it would have a masculine relationship to virtually everything else. In the same way, Adam, when he was made, when he was formed, contained within himself both masculine and feminine aspects. And from that masculine aspect, um, came the feminine. Okay, was taken out of it, and yet Adam himself, from the conceptualization of God, and being formed by that, would have a feminine aspect to it. And so, from that point, okay, take those ideas and set them aside for a minute. Look at the Sphirot. When we have Keter way up here, okay, and when this has to do with the principle and the idea of why when we include Keter, we do not include Da'at, and when we include Da'at, we do not include Keter, because when we're talking about this lateral relationship, Keter, there is in a sense a ceiling above which is Keter. Okay, Keter is still too unimaginable, too grandiose for any of this to really function and operate. That we're the feminine and masculine from any way that we can conceptualize it. But in terms of Chokmah, then Chokmah is the first, and it's a sephira of that has received anything, and so from that aspect, it is feminine. Okay, and it contains, just like Adam, it contains within it, whereas in Keter would be Adam Kadmon, which would be primordial man. That aspect of man would exist in Chokmah, in still a very nearly primordial form. It would have all of its aspects, both feminine and masculine, within it. And so, in that sense, everything below it, everything derives its being from Chokmah. Okay, and so we don't have to just say that Malkut derives its being, or the earth, so to speak, derives its being from that, but everything does. And so ultimately, though, in the end, and in Malkut, whereas through the other Sephirot, they contain within them, each lower Sephira is a greater complexity of everything that's above it. But it's only Malkut that contains within it actually all of the complexities of everything above it, of everything. And so, just like it's said that a woman, in a sense, sometimes it's said of her that she does not need to do all the mitzvot. She does not have to do all of those things that a man has to do, because she already contains within her all of those aspects. She is a complete whole. Okay, so too, when we talk about earth, or the physicality, the realm of physicality, so too within it are in all its complexities, it is a complete whole. And so it contains within itself all of those things. And so all of the wonders of our created universe contain with it everything that we need to actually cause this whole thing to ascend and to elevate all of it, because it's all contained here within it. And so when it talks about let me make sure I quote it correctly. God founded the earth with wisdom, with Chokmah. Okay, that's very true. Something feminine came from something masculine, just in the same way that Hava came from Adam, in the same way that in the beginning created God. Okay, in the same type of principle is at work there. And so, in the sense that we stop seeing these as left-right relationships and start seeing them as a lateral relationship, we can see that the very root, very root of the earth, the very you know, that most foundational function from which its life source dwells its nourishment is from Kokma. Okay, and yet in kind of opposite of that, when it says the earth with wisdom and the heavens with understanding, which is Bina, okay, that's very much true. Okay, when we look at the upper Sefirot, what we talk with, and the way we would refer to that as the heavenlies, as heaven, it only exists in its in its composite whole in terms of its what do I want to call it? It's it's a bit of a plurality, okay, of ideas, of conceptualizations. It only exists because of a constriction, okay, which is what basically at that level what Bina means. Something that takes that basically constricts Chokmah into something which can be more directed and more constricted into more complexity ultimately. And so ultimately, our whole concept of heaven is a constriction, is a it's really rooted in that. If it were not, then we couldn't exist, because above it is something that would destroy us, and so we could not be exposed to it. And so from all of those, from the very beginning of that source, and everything that we can call heaven, we have to understand, just like we understand that when we talk about God, we in a sense aren't talking about the ultimate of God, only that, those things that have been constricted so that we could understand the concept of a God. In the same way, our concept of a heaven, of the heavenlies, has to be a constriction. And so literally then the root of what heaven comes from, that root source of it, is a constriction. It's Bina. It all goes directly back to all the principles he's already established throughout the book as we've been progressing.
Yeah. I think
If I can pick up on that point real quick.
Yeah, go for
it. It brings me to the idea that I was saying of the pregnant male, and it sounds silly, but the idea is that this concept arose and it needed form. So the idea is that this being born twice, so the concept needed form and boundaries, arises from Chokmah and gestates in Binah, is born and then is received again by Chokmah, further developed, and then received a second time by Binah, and then birth. And the RE he uses the imagery of the Vav and Joseph to say that there's this maturation process that has to take place. Almost like you see in he uses the idea that Joseph has like two different areas of maturation when he was a child with his family, and then when he gets carried off into Egypt, and he has two stages of development. So the RE likens it to, that was his first stage. He's kind of unwieldy and not really formed, not very mature, and had to have some restriction again to become what he truly meant. So it's this idea of taking this tohu, this chaos, and making it into a worthy vessel that can be contained, that has the ability to contain and receive. And it's kind of difficult to follow in the writings of the Ari, because it's he uses a lot of and you kind of see a reflection of that in the Arya Kaplan's allusion to the divine name, because at the idea of this pregnant male and female and Chokmah and Bina coming to maturation, he says that's the divine Vav that's being matured there. It's taking on form. It's being nursed and sustained and matured in a two-step process.
So in that aspect, then Elisheva, does tohu vavohu really exist in everything?
Well, that's the idea. It does. I mean, it's as it takes on this maturation, he says it becomes clothed or hidden, or the idea of the klipot. It takes on further material, like the Ram Call says, it takes on this coarse material darkness that hides its true chaotic form and makes it into something, into shape and boundaries and palpable. And is it mamash? Is that the Sefer Yetzirah uses the term mamash. If I can find that. Okay, so I have Arya Kaplan's Sefer Yetzirah, and that's the only reason I have it bookmarked is because this was something I was talking about a couple weeks ago. On page 134 of Arya Kaplan's translation, he says, in the state of, so he uses the idea, this mental static, the idea like you close your eyes and you kind of have this like mental static that's constantly running. He says, he calls that Bina consciousness. It's this chaotic state of the mind. So anyway, on 134, he says, here is the state of mental static that is called chaos or tohu. As both the Kabbalists and linguists teach, the word tohu comes from the verb taha, which means to be astounded or confused. It is this state of mind and confusion where the mind is clouded with static. This is also associated with Bina consciousness, and accordingly, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ahead here. Where's the mamash? Oh, yeah. So this comes, I'm skipping, I'll go back a bit. I got the wrong page mark. It eventually forms into this idea. The word for substance here is mamash. This comes from the word mashash, meaning to touch. And so you go from tohu, which is here. It is out of this first stage of matter or chaos that was formed. The text here states that it was out of this chaos that matter becomes formed. So he's talking about this first, something even beyond tohu. I know I'm kind of jumping around here. Let me get my thoughts together here. It says, earlier, Sefer Yetzirah stated that chaos, tohu, was engraved and carved from water. As explained here, this water is alluded to Chokmah and the basis of all physical creation. The water mentioned here denoted the most primitive spiritual root of water as it exists in the universe of Atzilut, the realm of the Sefirot. It is out of this that the first stage of matter, chaos, or tohu, was formed. The text here therefore states that it is out of this chaos that matter was formed. The word for substance here is mamash. This comes from the root of mashash, meaning to touch. What is produced is a reality that can not only be seen, but which is physical enough to be touched. But we know at that level, there's really no true physicality that we can comprehend. And so that's where the Ari says that the second birth has to take place to give even more form and more maturation. I mean, it sounds silly, but the only thing I could think of is like a kangaroo. It gives birth to this embryo that couldn't survive on its own, but it's outside of the body and it still needs nursing and protection and sustenance. And it enters into almost like a second pregnancy and is sustained for a period of time outside of that, that protected womb state. In a pouch, it's almost like a secondary womb.
That's interesting. It's kind of, I mean, taking it back to Netzach and Yesod and Zeron Pin, if you will, the two triads. It's kind of like that. I'm just kind of slightly relating to that. Whereas you have the top triad, but it needed to be filtered down to the second triad, right? It's almost like they're kind of like connecting that rebirth, so to speak, because it wasn't complete at Netzach or at Chesed Gevurah and Tiferet. It needed further development.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the and that's exactly what the Ari says. He talks about these triads that take these embryonic states and mature them and develop them, and they grow and they take on more physicality and more distinction and more separateness until eventually you get to the embodiment of this process, like in Joseph, where he embodies like these aspects of beauty and judgment. He gets all of these from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and even his mothers in the mix in his life. But like you said, the Ari points to these triads as being these elements that develop and further mature and carry forward these concepts and ideas.
I just took a moment to kind of bullet point out some of these concepts, and I think what I'm I think where I'm getting thrown off a little bit is that I've been looking at it as linear, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And I think what we're really dealing with is kind of like a chiasm, almost, so to speak. And he hints at this in the next one, where he says, it says in the second next chapter, it says, in addition, the numerical value of Yod is 10, alluding to the fact that the 10 Sephirot are undifferentiated in Kokma, right, which is at a high level, separated and diversified from Bina to Yesod, so they're kind of like broken down, so to speak, and then finally brought back together as a single unit in Malkut. So I think that's kind of like the key for me to kind of grab onto what's being said here, and so I just kind of wrote down some of these things. So we've got the thing that I'm kind of building off of is this concept of the 6-day work week versus the Shabbat rest, right? The 6 days of work and the Shabbat rest. So the 6 days of work connects to Bina, which connects to heaven, which and that's said in the book, but then it also connects to separateness, right? We got the 6 days, that's separateness, so to speak. You've got Zeron Peen, if you will, which is the two triads. But then this also, and this isn't stated in this book, but I know that that heaven is connected to Messiah ben Yosef. Messiah ben Yosef connects to the work aspects, to being a tzaddik, right, and living righteously and earning, so to speak, the goodness from Hashem. So we got the 6 days of work. We got Bina, heaven, Messiah ben Yosef, and being separate, right? Then we got the Shabbat rest, which is the point of everything, right? Shabbat rest is, and this comes out of Chokmah, but Chokmah is really up at the beginning, at the top. It's really quite almost undifferentiated. We start to get differentiated when we get into Bina, but then it's going back to, but then we're getting all the way back down to Malkut, where everything's unified again, and this is the goal. And so maybe this is why in Malkut, and which connects to Eretz, or the earth, right, is established. It says God founded the earth in wisdom, right? So wisdom is up here at the top, and the goal, but the end is declared from the beginning, right? Well, the end is Malkut, which is a reunification. So we've got that connection going on right there. But the process between that, right? You've got heaven in between that, right? You've got the 6 days of work in between that. You've got the Messiah ben Yosef process. I get it deconstructed back down to the Messiah.
Hey Seth, you're
Breaking up a bit.
Getting really garbled.
And it's the receiving, huh?
You're getting really garbled.
Oh, am I getting
you
garbled?
broke up there for about 20 seconds or so.
Okay.
Right to the good point. You broke up.
Am I still garbled?
Nope.
You're
Okay,
doing good.
I'll try and like get through this real quick, so hopefully it doesn't garble again. So you got the Shabbat rest, you've got Chokmah Earth, Messiah ben David, and then totally integrated unity. So it's like it's going from a unity up at Chokmah. It's getting deconstructed through the Bina process, through heaven, through Messiah ben Yosef, right? The separateness, 6 days of work. Then we're getting back down to the Shabbat rest, and that's rooted in Chokmah, which is the beginning, but it's not Chokmah. It's now Malkut. But this is the earth. It's Eretz. It's a totally integrated unity of all the parts. This is the feminine aspect. It's Messiah ben David, which is receiving, and then kind of like it's the ultimate receiver. That's kind of how I'm kind of able to interact with this, so to speak, and then connecting it a little bit to the Messiah ben Yosef, Messiah ben David motif is helping me out a little bit too, because I've been kind of banging my head against those two concepts for the last few years.
Yeah,
So
The difference is you're just seeing it's just going from a simple unity to a complex unity.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
I mean, that's why the next. I'm
It's
sorry to
complicated
interrupt.
becoming simple
So
again.
when we take the time element away, and we look at the whole thing because as we look at progression, we always just naturally ascribe a time element to it. Like this is a progression in time. This is something that's happening sequentially. Okay, if we can see that, if we can see in a sense a sequential progress or process taking place, but take the time element out of it, we see that the sequencing of it is all now. It all just exists, and so to me that's a lot easier when I look at it that way. And take the time element out of it and realize that the time element only exists in Malkut. Okay, and so time is really and all the change that takes place is really only there when we're talking about the realm of physicality itself, and so so the whole thing is a complete whole, and so at the upper level of it, it's a complete whole in perfect simplicity, a perfect and at the lower aspect of it, it's a complete whole in a total complexity.
But where you said this is a chiasm, this is why this whole process has happened before. So if you look at the explanation of the shattering of the vessels, this is how Keter, our Keter, came into being into our universe. Is you have this primordial Sephiroth that went through this process of unity, shattering, tikkun, formation back into a single unity, which becomes our Keter, only to be expanded again and broken down again.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why the Ari alludes to this primordial shattering of the vessels when he looks at Binah, saying, so this process is a double process. It is, like you said, like this chiasm, and there's like a primordial chiasm, and it's repeated in man, through the human soul, because we are a manifestation of these Sephiroth and physicality in the world. And it was interesting. Like I was, because when I first read this book, I don't know how many years ago, I had to put it down getting at this point. I'm like, what? And I read it, but I didn't really, I missed so much because I had no concept of what he was talking about, because I hadn't really given any, I didn't have a lot of knowledge at that point. But, now that you get this idea, like the chiasm, and that, like all the 10 Sephiroth are contained within the 10, and, not to get it more complicated, but it's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2. It's constantly repeating. It just not in creation, but in people's lives, and in the life of Adam and his descendants. And there's patterns everywhere, and this pattern is repeated. And then, like you said, this idea of this triads being involved in this process, and always, yeah. So.
Well, I mean, it kind of connects to that whole phrase about, like, question, like, what was Hashem doing before the 6 days creation? Well, he was creating and destroying worlds. Is the whole concept. It's almost like we're either a more minute or a more a larger fractal of those fractals, so to speak. Probably more differentiated, smaller fractal of those other creations and destructions, so to speak. Which is interesting also when you consider what is Shabbat, related to in other than, desolation almost.
Well,
right?
It's odd that you say that, because it's supposed to be like the gap to the next level. It's not the final destination. It's a transition, which, like you said, implies that there's going to be a destruction of what was before.
Right.
Well, I think that's the interesting reason why, we're given the Shabbat and the 6 days, because it has to do with time, and so in sanctifying time, we can take this this repetitive aspect, this repetition that we see, and we can integrate it in a way that is, how do I say, is in a sense primordially us. I mean, we can identify with time. We can identify with repetition, and so we have the same pattern, the same created pattern in the 6th day and the 7th day of Shabbat, as we have within the created order, as we have within man himself, as we have within the Sefirot. We have those same repetitive patterns.
Hmm. Okay.
So for us, sanctifying time um, gives us an eternal perspective that transcends time.
So, are you saying that we sanctify time through the observance of this Shabbat? Is that what the holy days?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I never looked at it that way.
Apparently, you are not well read in the teachings of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Nope.
Who,
Neither
me?
am I.
More
No,
books.
no.
Uh, I'm pretty sure my dad got that concept from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, and he gets it from Rabbi Heschel.
No, I got it from Stolper and Hirsch, Inside Time, Moedim Perspectives, and Living Beyond Time.
Oh, that's from the teachings of Rebbe Nachman, right?
No,
No?
no, those are not.
Oh, what is his name? I don't remember.
Chances are it shares a similar root.
Probably.
Hmm.
Before we go on, I'm just I'm looking at this Messiah ben Yosef and Messiah ben David connection, and the only reason why I look at it is because I've spent a lot of time kind of trying to wrap my head around those two functions or forces, messianic forces, so to speak. But you got Messiah ben Yosef, which connects to the 6 days of work, which is you're working towards something, right? And then you got Messiah ben Yosef, right? Then you got Messiah ben David, who is you're it's a receiving thing. And I remember, I wish I had I wish I had the reference to this midrash, but Ari Goldwag commented it on one of his podcasts, and I don't know what podcast it was because I can't even go back to find that. But I just remember listening to it over and over again a while ago. And he basically said that Rachel and Leah dealt with the bread of shame, which is a concept we'd already discussed, but the idea that we need to bring something to the table if we're just receiving God's goodness without paying for it, then there's shame involved. So the idea is that God in His mercy would give us the ability to work, so that we could then enjoy His goodness. And Rachel and Leah dealt with the bread of shame differently. Or Rachel took the status or the process of a tzaddik, right, or the concept of tzaddik. You got to live righteous to deal with the bread of shame. You got to live a perfectly righteous life. And Leah said, "No, you can't live righteous enough. There's no way we could be righteous enough to earn it. So we just receive it." And the in the midrash, the kind of the takeaway was that both are right, both are correct. One's connecting to this concept of 6 days of work. One's connecting to the concepts of the Shabbat rest. And interestingly enough, Messiah ben David comes out of the line of Leah, right? Judah came from Leah. Whereas the Messiah ben Yosef side comes, we see coming from, and Yosef himself coming from the side of Rachel. In that aspect, and that it's just two different. It's kind of like you got these two different forces or functions that are going on at the same time in the world, and the world's built with like these. It's kind of like left and right, so to speak. Anyways, I might be digressing, but probably am. But anyways, that was just it just kind of sent me down that rabbit hole. So yeah, I'm gonna rate it unless someone has some thoughts on that. Go back to reading. All right, the next paragraph is actually I'm just gonna read this this paragraph starting with this relationship on 76. After we've kind of gone through all those explanations, maybe this will help. This will make a little more sense now. It says this relationship is illustrated beautifully in the Hebrew language itself. The Hebrew masculine personal pronoun is distinguished from the feminine personal pronoun by a single letter. The Hebrew who means he, while the Hebrew he means she. In the case of who, The central letter is the Vav, which represents the six masculine Sephirot. The feminine pronoun he contains the Yod. Yod is the single point, the unified power of Chokmah that predominates in the essence of a woman. In addition, the numerical value of Yod is 10, alluding to the fact that the 10 Sephirot are undifferentiated in Chokmah, separated and diversified from Bina to Yesod. So all throughout the Sephirot from Bina through Yesod, they're separated and diversified, and they're finally brought back together as a single unit in Malkut. This alludes to the fact that the entire array of 10 Sephirot reaches its culmination in Malkut. Yep, I'm connecting with that a lot better this time around. So, as we have said, the purpose of the Sephirot is to conceal God's light enough so that it can benefit those who have to receive it. In this sense, Malkut, kingship, represents the ultimate concealment of the divine for the purpose of interacting with creation. In Malkut, God constricts himself in order to give over his kingdom to man. He is essentially saying, I created the world in such a way that it is all up to you now. I am giving you the keys. Actually, this is a very deep concept. It is alluded to in the last of Rabbi Nachman's stories, the seven beggars. Rabbi Nachman began this story by telling about a king who had an only son. The peculiar thing is that the king wanted to give over his kingdom to his son during his own lifetime. This meant that the son would be king at the same time as his father. What Rabbi Nachman is teaching us is that the Malkut kingship is not just a vessel that receives. As we have also said, in order for Malkut to be perfect, it must also give what it receives. The receiving must transform it into a giver. In terms of a kingdom, for example, Malkut could represent the people's acceptance of the king's receiving all their needs. This kind of situation would be the paradigm of complete subservience. They are totally dependent on whatever the king provides them with. However, then they thus become his partners.
We're
Like
losing
King
you,
David,
Seth.
who gives his throne to Solomon. As we have seen, King David
Hold on,
represents the
Seth.
perfection of Malkut.
Back up,
See
Seth. Yeah, we lost you there.
Malkut taking this little bit of authority that the gestation and pregnancy. Was I cutting out?
Let go.
Yeah, a little bit.
It doesn't go on your foot. No.
Or anybody else?
Well, we lost you there
Am
for
I
a
still
while.
cutting
Seth.
out?
No, I think you're
Okay,
back now.
well, wherever I started cutting out,
We lost
wherever I
you.
started cutting out, why doesn't someone else start reading?
We lost you about the second paragraph on page 77.
Okay, well, since I seem to be having some issues, Eric, do you want to read and finish
Yeah,
out
okay.
that?
If the king wants his subjects to interact with him, however, then he must give them the ability to govern themselves. They thus become his partners in directing the kingdom. They become givers as well as receivers. The concept of a king giving his son his kingdom during his lifetime is paralleled by King David, who gave his throne to Solomon. As we have seen, King David represents the perfection of Malkut. We can see David as a person taking Malkut, taking this little bit of authority the Jews gave him, bringing it through a period of gestation and pregnancy, and giving back a full-fledged, powerful kingdom. We find here another aspect of pregnancy and birth. This is the paradigm of David. David also represents Malkut in the sense that he was the mouth of Israel. According to the Talmud, David's nights were divided into two parts. First, he would learn the Torah until midnight, and then he would compose songs and psalms of praise to God until dawn. It is significant that the psalms as a whole contain all 10 different types of song. This points again to the letter Yod in the pronoun he as king of Israel, it was important that David was be able to integrate all the Sephiroth. He was thus promised that the Messiah would come through him. It is the Messiah who will essentially give birth to a new world.
There it is, right there.
Yep.
That whole cycle.
Actually, I've been putting a lot of study into this. I was always fascinated. Some of the tidbits and references I've picked up on, I've been very excited. So if I can spread my excitement, I'd love to.
Please do.
So it came
Yeah.
about through Kessin. Kessin has given me so much of this, like, he's really great at organizing these very deep concepts and bringing all together all these different teachings into a really you can really understand and grasp and get the gist of what was being said. You get these new ideas. He's great. He's like the preeminent Hashkafa rabbi on the planet.
Yeah, he makes you feel like you're a lot smarter than you are, right?
Exactly. He's like, yeah, he makes it feel like it's your idea. But that being said, one of the things I've always debated about is like, why do we need why do we need the Meshiachim? Why do we need these messiahs to do it? And he made the very valid point, and I got that oh duh moment, that there's two rectifications that have to take place. There's the rectification of this original shattering of the vessels that brought about the Sephiroth that we experienced, that brought about our creation, our world, and our very existence. So there's in this rectification process, that was Adam's job. He had to rectify this holy evil and tame the holy Nachash and bring about this rectification and the original shattering of the vessels and restore the klipot and purify creation. Well, that wasn't done. That still has to be done. But on top of that, because of the actions that he caused in the garden, he and Eve, I'm not blaming it all on his shoulders, they brought about another level of impurity. What's the word I'm looking for? Corruption. So there's two levels that have to be dealt with. You have to deal with the corruption, the additional materialism, the additional concealment of the holy light, this greater physicality, this corruption has to be dealt with on one level. And then you still have to deal with the original shattering of the vessels and this original tikkun that was meant. And so there you have the one Messiah that addresses this idea, which is this repairing of the Sephiroth, this tikkun of this original primordial chaos and bringing it into repair and unity. And the RE brings this process down to, in this whole process of the shattering of the vessels, the culmination is the son of Jesse. That's the person, that's the soul that'll bring this tikkun. But you still have to deal with this impurity that's been brought into the world through the actions of Adam. One was brought about by God. Hashem himself brought about this imbalance and this evil, but then Adam added to it. So Adam has his responsibility, what he's liable for in creation, and the corruption that Adam and his descendants have brought, and you have the original restoration that has to still be done. So that's where my aha moment came with Kessin when you're saying that's why
Do we lose you, Elishiva?
is the klipo. Like, I'm sorry?
Do we lose you?
Are you
At
there?
least I lost you.
I don't know if anybody can hear me.
I hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now, but we lost you for a moment.
Oh,
I
Just for a
lost.
moment.
shush.
I lost you at the point when you started talking about the reason why we had the two Mashiachs.
So
Okay.
Kessin says, "Oh, really? All of that?" Oh, sorry, I'm kidding.
No, it was like
so-
5 seconds ago. It was like
Oh.
It was the most amazing thing
sorry.
I've ever heard.
Stop. So what he said is that's the reason that the Mashiach ben Yosef has to be hidden among the klipot. He has to be concealed. He's doing the dirty work, and Mashiach ben David doesn't have to have this level of concealment, this level of hiddenness, this aspect of being enveloped by the very klipot that they're there to purify. And it's this idea of being becoming part of this materialism to be able to rectify it. And so you see in Joseph's life, he gets sent to the most powerful, most powerful force on the planet at the time, which was Mitzrayim in Egypt. And he's able to overcome that. He's able to become a master of that realm. And he's only, he's the second most powerful person in that kingship. And its idea is he's able to do what Moshiach ben Yosef is to do, which is like to take this evil and make it into a force for good, to basically tame it and to contain it and turn it around. So that's...
Sorry, my daughter came in and has been talking to me, so I've been listening.
No, it's okay.
That makes a lot of sense to me, but at the same time, there's an aspect of it concerning the role of Mashiach ben Yosef as opposed to Ben David that is a little confusing to me. It leaves me wondering. Then, in the same way, then we can talk about this whole thing in terms of Yetzer Hara in a way, almost in the terms of there's almost this sort of primordial form of Yetzer Hara in that an evil inclination or as a force was created, and that that much has a certain amount to do with the shattering of the vessels, with the klipot. And yet there is here in the realm of Malkut and the realm of all these great distinctions, there's the human, there's the Yetzer Hara as well, and it's almost like we're talking about these are two different forces, or in a sense, one is a force in which one Mashiach must rectify, and the another is a force which the other must rectify. And so, Ben David rectifies here on earth. I mean, he rectifies for Malkut, whereas Ben Yosef would rectify it in the heavenlies, sort of as like it's described as kind of like a second Adam. Am I understanding that correctly? Am I making that connection right, or is that Oshiva? Is that what you're saying?
It's more in like in the system of the RE, and I know I've read this before, but I'll read it one more time. And I know I'm skipping ahead kind of the concept of the shattering of the vessels, but in regards to this transmission of the light and how this primordial shattering of the vessels took place, he talks about the eight kings, but he says ultimately, and it's hard. I'll say this: this book's a little bit difficult to follow because he doesn't give any of the Hebrew, and I don't have the original source script. But he says with this, so he's talking about this primordial light and the shattering of the vessels, and it's page 42 of Kabbalah of Creation. He says, when this light reached the base, two illuminations entered: one for the sphere itself, and one to transmit to the next sphere, sovereignty. Since the amount of the light was so brilliant, the base could not bear the light and shattered like the others. By the time this light reached sovereignty, it was contained within sovereignty, and was not destroyed. She was able to receive and bear the light. This is the real meaning of the scripture that says, the son of Jesse, the Messiah, lives upon the earth. Therefore, the base foundation is called the foundation of life. And so what Kessin was saying is there's this double rectification that has to take place, which, the Ramchal so eloquently points out. He says the first amount of evil in the garden was holy. It was made by Hashem himself. The added evil is impure. It's corrupt because it comes directly through the actions of Adam, and Adam was given like godlike powers. So you have two rectifications that have to take place before we can enter into this Olam Haba, which means the rectification of the original plan, the original holy evil that was imbued within creation by Hashem in the act of creating Gan Eden and the separateness of, and that falls and I'm just, like I said, I'm trying to form this idea still, but it seems to fall on the shoulders of Mashiach ben David to do that. And then you have the corruption that was caused by man and that seems to fall on the shoulders. That rectification, it seems to fall on the shoulders of Moshiach ben Yosef.
The way that I am simplistically understanding the process, so to speak, if you will, is that God creates. Obviously, God created creation to deal with the bread of shame and the framework that we're dealing with, and so there had to be some form of concealment or hester, right? Which the diminishment, if you will, that needed to be rectified for man to do something. Man had to have some work to do, and that work required there to be a deficiency, if you will, in the creation. And so that work right there, that rectifying the original hester, or the original concealment of Hashem in creation, or the completion, if you will, of creation. Like, creation wasn't created perfect yet, and man coming in and perfecting it was going to give him that work aspect of having done something, so that he could earn Hashem's infinite light and enjoy the goodness now as no longer a beggar, but as a participant in the process. And man is put in this place where, obviously, to be able to do that, has to have the capacity for free will. That's where you have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And Adam and Chava decide to, instead of making it through to Shabbat, and at that point, all they have to do is exercise kivura, right? They have to don't eat from that tree, and then the chesed side of it is eat from all of the other trees, right? So the only aspect of Gevurah was already in effect. They were already kind of operating under that process. So Messiah ben David, if you will, which is from the left side, which is the Gevurah side, or the restrictive side, that was already kind of that was a function that was being performed, and there was no deficiency in it yet. And the only deficiency was on this side of doing something positive, which was the eat from all the other trees, right? And so if they had continued in the path that they were created in, which was continued in exercising Gevurah, then they never would have none of this would have happened, right? They would have eaten from all the other trees. They would have made it to Shabbat, and then in Shabbat everything is unified, everything is one, and everything's good and hunky dory. And Messiah ben David is done. They brought down Kedushah, they brought down holiness into the vessel. The vessel was made clean, and so in doing so, then we've got Olam Haba. But instead, they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which increased the hester, increased the concealment, right? It sent them down a level spiritually. And so now the way that I look at that is they now have two jobs, right? They still have the primary job, which is to bring down holiness, which is this function of Messiah ben David. But now they've kind of gummed up the work, so to speak, of Messiah ben Yosef, which is this clean vessel, right? This vessel that was created clean is now is now dirty. It's sullied. It's unclean. It's impure. So they've got to purify the vessel, right? You've got to work through that process of purification. So that's the work of Messiah ben Yosef, is purifying the vessel.
And at this point comes the division. Now there is a division between purification of the neshama, the spiritual aspect of man, and a purification that has to come to the physical aspect of man. Before it was one-step process. Now it's twofold.
That's the old Texas two-step.
Sorry?
It's the old Texas two-step now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a terrible joke. So just I'm gonna erase it. Never mind.
It's almost like, and I was been like reading like some of these concepts. It's almost like these potentialities, these concepts that existed only in the form of thought, became a manifest reality once that they brought this impurity down. Like the reality of Gehenna. This idea of now you need a place of purification of the spiritual aspect of man, his soul. And that's, Gehenna, did it exist before? Well, yeah, I mean, because I'll say yes, it did, but it never was a reality that would have been experienced. It was a potential, but it was not a reality. But now it becomes a reality.
Right.
And
who would ever have the concept of soap if everything was clean and it was made clean, right? And if you had just never thrown it in the mud, you would never need soap to clean it.
Exactly. So there's Gehenna for the soul and death, and this idea of resurrection for the body. Those are the like the two split ways to purify those aspects of man. instead of being like you said, a clean, clean holistic process. Now it's become divided and much more painful.
Right. Right. Cool. And we've gone through the Sephiroth, guys. Now we're going to go on to this part that we keep hearing Elishiva talk about so often, which is the shattering of the vessels. That's our next chapter, and this one, we'll probably spend multiple weeks on the shattering of the vessels, and then after that, multiple weeks on the parts of theme, because there's just a lot to unpack there. But if you guys feel good about Malkut, I feel good about Malkut. Any other thoughts? Joel? Mark?
Well, and everything that was kicked over and over and over, I keep on hearing the shiur that I've listened to in the last couple of days by Rabbi Ginsburg, which today, as rehearing that shiur was very interesting in his explanation of this. And everything that we've said and how difficult it is to try and understand the concepts that are given here, only as tools, not necessarily as male or female, nor time, nor space. It has to do with a tool, how to accomplish that regathering, because that's what we're heading for, right? I mean, we're looking for Malkut once again in order to accomplish. And I think that it must happen, at least in my mind, prior to the revealing of Mashiach ben David. But Rabbi Ginsburg alluded to the whole story today. I listened to the whole story by Rabbi Arach, which is an excellent story about the human experience. One of the brightest of the students of his teacher, and yet, according to Rabbi in his story, he moved away to a different part of Eretz in order to enjoy a better climate, better nature, and then he's moving to that part of Eretz. He forgot all the Torah. And then, because of it, he made tshuva and comes back, but to Yavne and trying to reconnect with the other 4 students of the Rebbe to reconnect, and they prayed for him, and apparently the prophet came back and restored to him because of his willingness to do tshuva. He was able to reconnect and receive the Torah that he had learned and become not just good or better, but best, which is something the human is trying to acquire. I don't know if you got through the whole shiur, but I mean, it's just a little bit of what Rabbi had to share today. And I listened to the shiur because they postponed it because of the Sunday being the 17th of Tammuz. So they postponed it until today. So I listened to it live.
Mark, you're talking about the shiur that's called "What Is Good" number 2, correct?
Yes, but today he shared number 3.
Yeah, I got to listen to a little bit of number 3 today. What Is Good number 2 is quite good, and actually anybody who listens to this, it's from inner.org, Rabbi Ginsburg, and the title of the shiur is "What Is Good" number 2, and it's actually quite interesting to listen to because there's a lot of stuff that Rabbi Ginsburg talks about that you wouldn't really have. I mean, it would be really difficult to even begin to follow him, but when you have like these kind of concepts of what we've been discussing and hashing through tonight, of left and right, Malkut and Bina and Kokma and all these ideas, now you can start to unpack some of the stuff that he's saying in a bunch. Anyways, it just unlocks some of the stuff, and it is quite a good shiur. There's some really neat stuff in there. He talks about value and virtue, and how value is higher, or virtue is higher than value in one sense, but in another sense, value is actually the purpose of everything, and so it's actually even more so. And you can connect value or virtue and value. Virtue would be Messiah ben David, and value would be Messiah ben Yosef, if I'm relating to that properly. And then, or you could look at it as one being primary and secondary, so to speak. Anyways, I'm not going to try and rehash it because it's a long shiur, but it's quite good. And he has a really neat kind of section on Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, which the name Arach, if you respell it, or look, just give it a slightly different vowel pointing, it spells Arech, which Arech means value. And so he was the quintessential, understood as the quintessential or the rabbi who understood more than anybody the value of value. So I'll stop there. Go listen to the shiur. It'll be a lot better than trying to have me rehash it.
Yeah, but it was more interesting that he ascribed value to female, to the woman.
Yep.
And he ascribed the other aspect to the male.
Virtue to the male, value to the female. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, he's connecting to a lot of stuff we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, without the basic framework that we're dealing with, like I would listen to these shiurs and I'd be like, that was a lot of really good stuff, but I wouldn't even have the capacity to walk away with much of anything other than he talked over my head the whole time. Now I'm able to kind of barely hold on, which is nice. Well, anybody else? Any other thoughts?
That's very enlightening tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, it was good. And thank you guys again. I mean, honestly, genuinely, thank you for kind of helping me work through those couple sections. I feel like I am at least able to interact with the concepts he was bringing down right there. I do appreciate it. So we will.
Yeah, good comp.
Yeah, very good. We'll pick this up again next week. We will be starting chapter 10 on the shattering of the vessels. Should be fun. So, Shavua Tov. Have a wonderful week, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.